At the end of my video talking about meditation, I came to the conclusion that meditation takes you to a nice place, a sort of a stillness, a detachment. And I asked the question of how valuable is that? Is it worth the effort of learning to meditate in order to reach that state? So I wanted to think a bit more about that. Firstly, how would I describe that? Stillness, it's the right word. Yes, you seem to find a still point inside yourself. And when you've found that point, you can actually look outwards and inwards and still hold on to that stillness. It's tempting to call it detachment, but detachment can be a rather sort of cold idea. And in a way, non-attachment is a bit better. It's like if you watch, say, horses walking around in a field, you can do that in a non-attached way. You're just enjoying seeing the horses moving. Or else you can get on a horse and be carried away. And it's a bit like that with these thoughts. As you're meditating, the thought of what am I going to have for breakfast could come up. And either you get on that thought and it carries you away and suddenly you're no longer meditating, you're rehearsing cooking breakfast or whatever. Or else you see it coming up and you let it pass because you're staying where you are. Some people call this a state of mindfulness, which doesn't work for me because it doesn't feel like a fullness. It feels more like a sort of open emptiness. Open because you're open to impressions coming in or thoughts rising up. But you're not actually full of anything. That's how it feels to me. So I like the term centered. It seems to be centered, describes it well for me. And I prefer that term. Because once you've found that center, you can find it anywhere to a certain extent. You don't have to go through the whole process of sitting and getting to meditative position and meditating, because you've found something that's in you. It's like you could search all over a town to find your favourite coffee bar. Once you've found it, you can just go there whenever you want. You don't have to do the whole search again. Now, that is valuable because if you've found that point, you can find it wherever you are. So you might be sitting at your desk at work, you might be cooking a meal or something, and to quite an extent you can step back into that centered feeling and be much more mindful as you cook the meal or as you sit at your desk. Now there does seem to be value in that because you're less likely to do things in a sort of knee-jerk way. One of the problems of our life today, it's been suggested in a video like The Social Dilemma, is that people are so flooded with information coming in on something like Facebook or Twitter or something like that, that stuff comes pouring in and they feel they have to respond to it, so they click like or share, whatever, without really thinking about it. And so what happens is that a lot of, it's really what gets passed on is whoever shouts the loudest, you'll join in the shout. And it's like a crowd effect. Now, if you were in that sort of non-attached, calm, centered state, and something comes in saying, Trump is Jesus reborn or something like that. Instead of just sort of, I must share this and pass it on, or I would like it or dislike it, you think, what's all that about? You're much less likely to react to it. You sort of, it doesn't trigger you in the same way. So there's less of this sort of knee-jerk response of the crowd. And I think that's good for society, if more people did that. Because you're being more truly an individual, rather than just one of a crowd. If you're doing that, you're finding yourself. Now, these thoughts that come up in meditation, part of the thing of just looking at them is that, as I say, they don't carry you away in the same way. And also, usually fewer of them come up. And so you do move towards a silence and a stillness. But you don't feel you've got to get there. It's just you're being less attached to the thoughts. Now, when I was, before I gave my talk about meditation, I was finding a lot of thoughts were coming up about doing a video on meditation. And a lot of interesting ideas were coming up. And a sort of sense of urgency of them. And this happened to me in the past. I mean, for instance, when I was doing a lot of meditating, when I was doing the abdominal operation, of course, initially I would start trying not to think, and so I tried to reduce the thoughts. But then what would sometimes happen when I was getting quite good at that is a really wonderful idea would come up. And I was planning to write Thundersqueak at the time, and so, wow, this would be good for Thundersqueak. And there's quite a temptation, if you're a creative thinker, to say, I mustn't let this go. I mustn't lose this. You don't want to be in the situation of, there are famous stories of people who've had a mind-blowing idea in their dreams. And then when they wake up, they know it was a mind-blowing idea, but they can't remember what it was. They're really frustrated. So you think, well, I want to write this down. This is so good. But because I was meditating and a little bit detached from thoughts, instead what I said is, that's inside myself, what I said was, that's a really good idea, but it's come at the wrong time. Could you please come back again when I'm not meditating? That was what I said to the thought. And it actually worked rather well. I didn't lose any of these wonderful ideas. They did come back later. And they came back better, usually. It's almost as though, you told someone to go back and rewrite what they've done, and they do produce a better version. So nothing was lost. But this time, these thoughts kept coming up rather persistently. And instead of being worried by that, oh dear, am I losing the ability to meditate, I thought, this is actually trying to tell me something. It's trying to tell me that I ought to do a video about meditation. But also, it was telling me something else, which is, this is the only opportunity for these thoughts to come up, because I don't allow myself to sit down and just think. I usually feel I have to be doing something. Now, as a child, I would spend hours thinking. I could sit down by the stream or in a field, and my mind would wander and think. And even in my 50s, in the 90s, I constructed a little gazebo in a place where there was no houses in sight. And I could sit there and think up ideas for books and all sorts of things. I could spend the whole morning just thinking in that quiet place. So why don't I do it now? In the 80s, someone quoted me, said that I had told them that waiting is a gift of time. And I was interested in that because I could remember saying that, yes. You see, as an impatient person, when I'm just coming up the traffic lights and then they go red, and I know I've got to wait, this is a slow traffic light, God, I've got to wait a minute or something. It's quite frustrating, you feel like thumping the steering wheel, come on, get on with it. But actually, it's an opportunity to think you've been given a gift of time, a whole minute, without any obligation to do anything except be there. And I realise that there's a lot of things in life which, as an impatient person, I find frustrating. You go into the bank and there's a queue and you realise you're going to be there, stuck there for 5 minutes. Well, there's 5 minutes where you can think. As I used to as a child, I can let my mind wander, I can dream for 5 minutes. It's not a bad feeling. And so think of a waiting room. That's a place where you have to wait. Now, what do they put in a waiting room? There always used to be magazines. And so while you're waiting, you pick up a magazine and flip through it. Now, you don't see that now because they don't put magazines. Because of COVID-19, you can't have something that other people have handled. But magazines have begun to vanish before then, because what a lot of people do, they come and sit in the waiting room, they look around, see if there's a long wait, and they take out their cell phone and start flipping through, looking at emails, looking at the news, or whatever. Now I realised that was something I was doing a lot in my life. Those odd moments, I was sitting at the table and I'm waiting for my wife to arrive, or I'm on the phone and it says, your call is important to us, there's music playing. These moments, I tend to look at my cell phone, check the news, check the emails, look at Facebook, whatever. Now that's a good thing to do. It's a good idea to check your emails. It's a good idea to check the weather, good idea to keep up with the news. But do you need to do that so often? You can make a good case for checking your emails at breakfast, lunch and supper time. But you don't have to do it several times an hour in between. So I realised that what I was doing was that I'd lost those periods of childhood when one would just sit and think and let your mind wander and creative ideas could come up. And so those ideas, the only time they could get me was to come while I was meditating. And so what I've done is to not go to my iPhone every time there's a break or I'm kept waiting. I try to enjoy the waiting itself and say, now's at a time where ideas can come. Let me plan ahead rather than filling the time by looking at a screen. Again, it's a way of rediscovering yourself. Now, I described the walking meditation where you combine this non-attached, being open to everything, with walking. So you have the discipline of knowing when you've lost your attention and going back to where you last had it. What you're doing is you're experiencing world as pure sensation. And I gave the example of as you're walking along, there's a gate. No, a gate is a thought, a word. What you actually see is a series of parallel wooden bars. That's the actual sensation reaching you. But, of course, parallel wood bars are also words. You're trying to get back to the state that a baby would be in before it has any words. A baby looking at that gate would just see a thing. Not even a thing, it's have an experience, a visual experience. Now, of course, that's asking a lot, that you could go that far and not have words. But it's what you're approaching. You're removing this compulsion to name everything, which just happens automatically. You're reducing that automatic knee-jerk reaction. Getting back to the sort of mind of a pre-verbal child. Now the question is that itself valuable? Is that something important? And I'd like to address that in a third video. What is so valuable, important, or special about perceiving the world without labels or thoughts?